Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the June meeting of Gloucestershire Schools Forum. Welcome particularly to some new members, and I'll return to those members a little bit later on. But before we do that, could we move straight to the first item on the agenda, which is the election of the chair of Schools Forum. And can I hand over to Joe to manage that, please?
Yeah, so please could I have a nomination for the election of chairperson?
Could I nominate Andrew Harris, please, Joe?
Thank you, Will. And I do need a seconder, please.
I'm happy to second, Joe.
Yeah, sorry, who was that?
Lynn Dance.
Lynn Dance. Any more nominations, please? No, I can't see anybody indicating. So, Andrew, it's over to you.
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you,
Andrew.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your support. Hopefully we'll have another 2 years without too many contentious meetings. So can we now move on to the election of vice chair? And can I ask if anybody is willing to stand for the post of vice chair?
Can I just explain, Andrew, that the vice chair is a really important role because I'll step in if ever the chair can't make a meeting, but there's no wider time commitment involved other than that. So it'd be really good if we could have a volunteer.
My intention is to be here for every meeting for the next 2 years, if that helps.
If there's no volunteer, I'll do it.
Okay, sorry, who was that? Peter Nolan?
Yep.
Excellent.
And can I have a seconder, please?
Peter Hales, I'm happy to second that.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you.
Worries.
Okay, Joe, can I now ask if we have any apologies for absence?
Yes, apologies received from Rob Wilcox, Elisa Entwistle and David Alexander.
Okay, thank you very much. As I said, we've got a number of new members joining us today. We've got 2 new primary head teachers, Elaine DeGros and Stephen Dean. 2 primary governors, Rhiannon Evans and Peter Nolan. A secondary head teacher joining the School Forum today, and that's Julia Maunder. An early years representative as Becky Poulter-Jewson. The secondary governor, Alison Berry, and also 2 new elected members, 2 cabinet members. So Councillor Philip Robinson, who's a cabinet member for Economy, Education and Skills, and Councillor Stephen Davis, who's the member for Children's Safeguarding and Early Years. So welcome to all of you. We did discuss as to whether we would sort of go round the table, as it were, and introduce ourselves, but felt that given this format in the space of a 2-hour meeting, that would probably take up quite a lot of the meeting. So I apologise if some of us are left thinking, well, who is that? But I'm sure that things will work their way out in due course. But anyway, thank you so much for volunteering to join the Schools Forum, and really look forward to your contributions to the discussions that we have. Can I ask now if there are any declarations of interest at all that anybody wishes to make?
I can't see anybody indicating, Andrew, and I haven't received a notification of any.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. And Joe, do we have any public questions?
No, none received.
Okay, thank you very much. So can we now move on to the minutes of the last meeting, which was on the 14th of January? So first of all, if we can just take any comments about accuracy. So if we start on, certainly if we start actually on the attendance list, is everybody happy that that accurately records whether they were here or not? Good, okay, thank you. So any items of accuracy on page 2, page 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8? Okay, thank you very much. And then if we just go through and look at the matters arising, the action points then. So on page 4, there is an action sheet as well, which follows the minutes. So on page 4, item 5.11, there was an item about the implementation of the teachers' pay arrangements. Phil, you were going to have a look at that. You got anything that you wish to report?
Yeah, so it's not Sarah, because it was Sarah that raised it in the previous meeting, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It's not actually information that we capture or hold. So I've investigated with HR. So we don't actually have any kind of comprehensive information across the system. The feedback from HR in the education team was that broadly, and is anecdotal feedback. The feedback is that broadly, schools have been operating in line with the national recommendations, but obviously we don't have a full picture of it and don't capture that information.
Okay, thank you. Then on page 5, it was about EHCPs and whether the rise in requests was a consequence of the impact of COVID-19. Any comment on that?
Yeah, so and this is covered a little bit in the reporting this time, but we've just had the SEND2 data released as well nationally. So our aim is to try to pull together a comprehensive view of SEN data and a detailed analysis of that to bring back to a future meeting. Also looking at the trends around COVID as well. So we'll bring that one back in more detail in the future, if that's okay.
Okay. And then for the next item, which is on page 6, it was about particularly those local authorities that have very low deficits or no deficits on high needs, and as to how they're managing that. And am I right to think that that's something that will be pursued in September?
Yeah, we've reached out to colleagues in the Southwest and we've got a couple of meetings set up in September to go into that in a little more detail and understand the context.
Right, okay. And then there's the F40, more detailed analysis of high needs funding, which is available on the internet now if people wish to look at it, I understand. Yeah. And then finally, about monitoring the exceptional costs, which were a consequence of COVID-19. And on the back of the action sheet, there was a summary analysis. Is there anything that needs to be added to those numbers or questions about those numbers?
No comment from me, Andrew, unless anybody's
Okay.
got any questions around any of the COVID.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. So can we now move on to the 2020-21 outturn and maintain school balances, which is agenda item 7. And I think that's for Neil and Phil to take us through, please.
Yeah, I'm just going to attempt technology and share my screen because I've got some slides to take us through some of the key messages. So I'm hoping that's now visible to everybody.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, great. Okay, so brilliant. Right. Okay. So again, as normal with the forum meetings, what I've done is set up a kind of overview from our side on some of the key issues identified in the reports. Obviously, if there's anything I don't cover in the key issues that you want to pick up, obviously feel free to do so, and we'll stop at various stages around these. The first thing in relation to reporting was the outturn for 2021. What we've got on the screen there is the kind of the picture of the final result in 2021. So the high needs deficit or the high needs position ended up 5.119 overspent, which was 330k under the the planned deficit position. There was an underspend in the schools block of 750,000, which I'll talk about in a bit more in a second. And then the normal lag retention in early years, 0.989, that's sat there as a reserve in early years at this stage. All of that meant that we had an in-year position of 3.48 million overspend, adding to the 8.412 we were carrying forward, which means we've currently got a balance of 11.892. But it's worth being mindful that those two red numbers there, the 0.750 and the 0.999, are reserved balances in those blocks and will be accessed. So talk just a little bit more about the breakdown of the 0.750. So this was in the report, shows the de-delegated balances, and in 2021 we were 292k underspent in the de-delegation. So the de-delegation, for members that have been involved previously, you'll know it's around the October pupil increases, targeted intervention support, union facilities support, and education functions. So three of those areas just marginally underspending. I guess the big movement there is in the October pupil increases, so we didn't use as much of that as we intended. That added to a carried forward balance in that area of 0.497, which gets you to 789 reserve in the de-delegated balances there, and that's maintained schools that approve those de-delegated balances. How we got to the 2021 position, the 0.75, so that you've got the 292,000 there in the de-delegated. There was an underspending the growth fund as well of 283, and some savings around the school closure that brought back in 175,000, bringing us back to that 0.75 underspend in the schools block. So that's the schools area. I don't know whether it's sensible to pause there and just ask whether there are any questions around the schools outturn, if that's okay, Andrew.
Anybody wants to ask any questions at all?
Sarah Murphy.
Hi,
Sarah?
thank you, Joe. Thank you. I've got a question about just why the union facilities is 0.00, because we have been, obviously, we have had some de-delegated money into the facilities pot, thank goodness.
So that's the balance. So it's basically saying that all the money that was put into that pot was spent. So there was no surplus or deficit generated in that one.
Okay, thank you.
You spent all your money.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions at all?
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Phil.
So I'll move on to the high needs outturn. Like I said, we were reporting all year against this one, and we'd set a deficit budget of around about 5.5 this year. That was our plan. That was our setting out this year in high needs, or last year, I should say now, to really kind of understand the trends that we were seeing in high needs and come in on budget. We came in slightly under 330k, like I say. So the overspend in the end was just over 5.1 million. There are variances I've noticed in the report, and I guess as I talked about in the past, of us trying to really get a control and an understanding of what's happening in the SEN area. Whilst we've come in on budget, I'm really keen for us to start over the course of this year to really analyse these different variances in the different parts of the high needs block. So you can see there is a number of different areas that were up and down within high needs. So we've got a picture of the trends and the quantum of the issue now. There's a question about this year, just trying to make sure we've got a really good grip on each of the different lines. So we've got underspends in a number of areas there identified, and then so primary underspending 449,000 in mainstream SEM funding, but then secondary over £500,000 overspending. So whilst we're getting the overall picture right, just really working this year on trying to make sure we've got a full grip on each of these areas. And there was obviously some effect of COVID as well. It's worth, it wasn't a normal year last year, and as identified at the top, AP in particular was under numbers, and as such contributed a saving this year. So that's broadly the high needs position. I guess again I'll pause at the point around high needs just to ask if there's any questions specifically around the outturn for high needs.
Rhiannon Evans.
Rhiannon?
Hi. Yeah, I'm new to this, so sorry if this is a naive question. In terms of I come representing a school where we have a high disproportionate number of children with EHCPs or trying to get EHCPs, and we're struggling to get EHCPs because we can't get the educational psychologist provision allocated in order to get the paperwork done to get the EHCPs that we really need. So we have a number of children that just aren't getting the funding. So I don't know if that's something that's happening across the board. I know there's COVID reasons for that, or understaffing in that area of social help, but there's stuff going on which is meaning we can't get the HCPs in place, therefore we can't get the funding, and so we're really struggling. I'm sure that's the experience of other schools. I don't know if this is the place to raise that or not, but that is the reality of what's happening for us.
Does anybody else want to come in on that at all?
I can't see anybody indicating,
Okay.
Andrew.
All right. Chris Spencer? Chris, you raised your hand.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry.
That's okay.
There is, as people probably know, a national shortage of educational psychologists. So it's making recruitment very difficult, and we are looking at ways of trying to stimulate the market and grow our own by funding the training of some trainee EPs who might then remain with us for some time. And we have been particularly successful at growing our own social workers recently over the last 2 or 3 years, where we've set in place similar pipelines to grow our own. So we've gone from 50% agency social workers now to 20. So we're looking to replicate that with educational psychologists going forward. But we're struggling with the supply. And in fact, Exeter, who supplies quite a lot of the regional EPs, have reduced the number of places on their courses. So we're looking at lobbying the higher education institutions as well. So there's we are aware of it as an issue, and we're on it. We're also looking possibly at a framework of engaging private EPs, but as part of a framework and whose work and the quality of their work we can QA. I guess plans are in place, but you won't be experiencing the benefit of those just yet.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Anybody else at all?
I don't know what's supposed to happen in the meantime for the actual children and teachers and classes that are being massively affected every day.
Right.
I don't know.
Right. Okay. I think we need to record that as being an area of concern, but also acknowledge that the local authority are working to try to ameliorate the circumstances. Peter Hales.
Just to say that's replicated in a number of schools across the county. I know through my role as Academy Governor, we've hit similar issues in other areas of the authority as well. And also in my role as head teacher of an SCMH school, I've had numerous requests from mainstream schools asking how we can get educational psychology support but I do know it's on the agenda of the local authority through the educational leadership group, and it has been raised there with Jane Lloyd Davis. So it is definitely on the agenda of the local authority, but I know that doesn't help mainstream head teachers when they're feeling like they're missing out, and more importantly, their pupils are missing out because of the lack of service.
Okay. Thank you, Peter. Chris, did you want to come back, or?
Yeah, only, I mean, this isn't going to make people feel better, but and so apologies for that. But if you look at the data, we're not out of sync with other local authorities in terms of the numbers of EHCPs, and we're processing more than ever now. I mean, there's over 5,000 young people with an EHCP now in Gloucestershire, and it was about pardon me, about 1,000 less than that 3 years ago when I arrived. So, you know, the rate at which we're working is ever increasing. So it's you know, it's a question really, I think, of looking at the whole picture, taking that ride in the helicopter and looking down and seeing how we can control that flow of work into formalised EHCP, because ultimately, at the end of the day, an answer to a child's special education needs is in good provision and good teaching, not in a piece of paper which says EHCP at the top. So, you know, I think it's a much more complex issue than at first we might imagine. And the new education reference group will be looking at this very shortly in July, and Phil's producing a paper for that group so that we can come together and look at this at systems level to try and resolve it.
Okay, thank you very much. Phil, do we move now on to the earmarking of the DSG deficit? Is that next?
Yeah. So that would be the next one, the recommendation. Yeah. Is that the form agrees below? Yeah.
So can I ask if there is anybody who disagrees with that recommendation or has questions about it? If that's not the case, if nobody has questions or has concerns about it, then I'll take it that the feeling of the meeting, as it were, is to approve that recommendation.
Nobody's indicating, Andrew.
Okay, thank you very much. So, so we'll take it that Schools Forum accepts that recommendation. Okay, thank you, Phil. So we're on to maintain school balances now.
Yeah, so also in the report, we gave a kind of picture of where the maintained school balances are and the position this year. And I guess, you know, what we can see is an improved balance position across the board there. We provided tables in each of the areas. The one area that obviously is an outlier in that is AP, alternative provision, and that will be due to the significant closures and reduced access to and need for that provision during the COVID period. Apart from that, what we've seen is a rise, and you can see there both primary and secondary are rising balances in the maintained sector. Small variations in special, but overall, given the position, and I guess it'd be really interesting to get views from the members here. You know, we talked a while ago about the potential impact of COVID on budgets, and there was quite a lot of pressure from the F40 group on the DFE to fund another round of exceptional costs. You know, materially from what we've seen here, and I was at the F40 executive group last week, and they reported very similar, actually, that we overall in the schools area we haven't seen necessarily the exceptional costs that we might have anticipated, or if we have, those exceptional costs have been offset by some savings. Now, I know there will be individual cases where that may not be the case. But overall, that's what the picture's showing us. And I don't know whether there's any comments or thoughts from schools around kind of that increase this year.
Sarah has a hand up.
Sorry, yes, I've just seen it. Sarah. Hello.
I can comment in terms of casework, in that my sense, I haven't got figures to present to the meeting, but I could do. My sense of the amount of restructuring and redundancy support that I've given to NEU members this academic year has been lower than in previous years. So often in the spring term, we're rushed off our feet with supporting staff in redundancies and restructuring consultations. I've had some. I'm trying to think if I might have had one in a secondary and a few in a primary, but far fewer than I might have seen in other years, if that's an indication of what school budgets are looking like.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Any other comments that anybody wishes to make? Okay, thank you very much. So in the papers, we now move on to the DFE 2019-20 outturn.
Yeah, so Sue, I think this one's at Sue Hall.
Yes, thanks, Andrew. So this is the position excluding DSG for the children and families service area, and the overspend position was 10.7 million, as the slide suggests, of which 7.3 million was related to COVID costs. And those COVID costs really sort of identified about 5 different areas: significant additional costs for external placements, transition of care leavers where we couldn't move them on to appropriate accommodation, it wasn't available, home to school transport costs, staffing, and SEN support. So those made up the 7 million, which was covered by the general grant we got from the government to fund those. That left an underlying overspend of 3.478 million. And I think the key pressure, the 2 key pressures that were underlying were the placements budget, and that 10 million is a reflection of the gross budget, not the net, and also home to school transport. The external placements budget is really a reflection again of the market, some of the complex cases we're currently having to find accommodation for, and an increase in the children in care numbers, which at the end of March were getting on to be 800. And I know those numbers have been exceeded in the first few months of this financial year. So significant pressure on our social care services. One thing to say just is that we have had significant costs with staffing, social care staffing, but there has been some work to stabilise the workforce, as Chris has said, through the academy, social work academy, better recruitment, better managing of teams and casework. And that position, if you take out the COVID impact, came back to be a break-even position in year. So a really positive point there, and we're looking to replicate that in the coming year, although there is a significant pressure on our social care teams. And the final bit really to pick up is the home to school transport, which has got an underlying overspend of about 1.3 million, and that reflects some of the cost of some of the transport routes to do with SEN provision, and the number of solo journeys, and just the number and rate of SEN routes that we need. And there was a budget provision for 21-22 of 2 million to be able to absorb those costs going forward into 21-22. Appendix A details some of the further variances that there were in the children and families outturn position. This position is draft because it's going to cabinet next week. Therefore, until it's been to cabinet, it's still in draft form. But I'm not expecting the figures to change at all. So those are just some of the highlights, Chair.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. Does anybody have any questions for Suzanne about that?
Can I ask one? But firstly, can I ask, because I've never used WebEx, exactly how do I put my hand up?
If you you can put your hand up. If you, I don't know what you can see. If you just click on your name, you can put your hand up. Then I'll see that, or somebody will.
I can click on my name, but it just offers me make me a presenter. It doesn't offer me put my hand up. Maybe because I'm using an iPad, Joe. Is that perhaps why I don't get that?
I'm trying to see where it is on mine because I'm a host. I can't actually put my hand up.
I think you go into participants.
Yeah, if you go to participants,
and then press on, you'll see a hand and it says raise hand or lower hand. So
for me, because maybe I'm using an iPad, the only option I have to see is make me a presenter. I don't have anything about, because I just Googled it. I have nothing about how to do a hand. So I don't know. Maybe just
if you tap down the bottom of the screen.
Yeah.
If you tap down the bottom, you should then get like a row of buttons that will come up with either mute, start video, share. You'll see like a person. If you touch the person with the red dot, and you see the list, if you find your name, and then you just press the raise hand function on the bottom right.
Yeah, that's why I don't see I have. Okay, maybe I'll speak to Joe afterwards, but it's not obvious. But my question was, considering that the schools were shut for a period of time for COVID, would that not have expected to see a reduction in some of the home to school costs because we weren't obviously transporting children to the schools?
Just to come back on that, Alice, it's a good point. Because of the whole support that was coming through from government, we paid most of our suppliers to make sure those contracts were in place when we needed to return to them. So the cost was still there, and we still did a lot of transporting of SEN pupils over that period. So the underlying costs were there. We had to change some of the providers at short notice as well, so the procurement costs were much greater, and there would have been most probably some taxis maybe for children in care as well, and all that side of things. So yeah, we obviously reduced costs where we could, but there was a requirement really to support our providers.
And when provision was open, the actual costs were significantly higher than they would normally be because of the COVID restrictions and guidance and limited numbers of, we couldn't use the kind of minibuses, etc. So we were using a lot more taxis. So yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Andrew, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, thank you very much. Sorry about that. So can we now move on to the agenda item 8, which is the high needs strategy?
Yep. So I've given a kind of, again, an overview of where we are. I've included the 3-year plan, which I'm very excited, shows the potential for an in-year improvement or a surplus potentially in high needs by 23-24. So in the pack you'll have seen that obviously we've got to approve this year's budget, but then there's a 2-year move beyond that, which is showing a continued deficit in 22-23, and then in 23-24 starting to look like we're coming out. Now, I tried to say in the papers that we need to be very careful about this because there are some assumptions behind this. There's a couple around the funding, the income one. I have continued to include some support from the schools block around the 1 in 40, which we have done the last 2 years. So any surplus that was in the schools block, Forum has voted to be able to use that to continue to support the continuation of the 1 in 40 model to provide enhanced funding for schools with high levels of EHCPs. And I have also assumed that the additional funding coming into high needs is going to continue. Now, we are, as you know, we're in the 2nd year of the 3-year funding package. So before COVID, in September 2019, I think it was, Boris announced a 3-year funding package for education. We're currently in year 2 of that, and in the first 2 years, we've seen broadly a 6 million increase in high needs funding. So we're assuming that the 3rd year of that funding package will provide the same, and that's I think a strong assumption given the rises that we've seen and the commitment they made around additional funding. However, we've also made the assumption that the government will continue to fund the rising levels of need beyond the 3-year funding package. At this stage, we're still seeing a rising level of somewhere in the region of 350 net EHCPs a year. And for this 3-year funding package, we've started to see a position where that is being funded in the right way. And all of the conversations we're having, policy level with the F40, etc., all premised around a continuing level of investment to support that rise in need. So the 3-year plan at the moment shows us in a position where we could be potentially in 23-24 in an in-year surplus. At that stage, if all goes in along the plan that we're showing here, we will still be broadly in an £18 million cumulative deficit. And this morning we've been in a session that's been focused around this, and this, and I've said this in previous meetings, we are still actually, as far as it goes in terms of cumulative position, we're not by any stretch at the top end of this system. We've got local authorities who are 30, 40, 50, and up to £80 million in deficit at the moment on high needs. But ultimately, we'll still have an £18 million deficit. And as a forum, we need to, at some stage, have a really clear agreement about how we see ourselves treating that position once we can get back to a point of an in-year balance, and hopefully, as it shows there, surplus. And that's a really tricky challenge, because all of the conversations I have with schools around deficit is any accumulated deficit that you're having to pay off is using funding that is intended for children at that moment in time to pay off a past deficit, and that is a big challenge, particularly when we're talking about the scale that we've got here. So I guess overall, I'm really positive about the fact that we can show this position, and that we think, with a clear understanding of the trends and the right investments in the system, we can get back to a balancing position, which is, obviously great. It's the right stepping stone in terms of addressing the challenge, but we will still have a large deficit position that we then need to consider how to treat. So I'm going to pause there and see if there's any kind of questions, thoughts, observations around the 3-year plan and that cumulative position.
Does anybody want to? Julia, you raised your hand. Julia, I think you might be on mute.
Sorry, is that with me you were calling on, Andrew? Julia?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, it's just everything went a bit pear-shaped, it froze, and I kept hearing Phil repeating his last point. My main concern, I absolutely get the idea, and excuse me, because this is my first forum, so again, if I'm out of order, do put me back in my box. But my concern, I guess, is around the ambition to pay down the deficit. I absolutely get, and to get us back to a surplus position. But you referenced the fact that other LAs and other areas have much higher deficits. And I guess it's a pros and cons balancing act, isn't it, between the amount that we are spending and the other issues that are being flagged as really major concerns around permanent exclusion, alternative provision, and the effectiveness of that. And obviously that costs money. I just wanted to flag up that I know there's a proposal around freezing the top-up funding. That would be the 9th year of freezing. And I just think, to put it in perspective, our staffing costs have risen by 11% in those 9 years. We've lost the 1 in 75 and we're now on 1 in 40. And I'm speaking, I guess, on behalf of schools with high levels of SEN. With 460 hours of support to deliver next year, we manage it on 320 hours of staff. So we do try and look for economies of scale. But that difference, that freezing in the top up, has created, if you like, an inclusion tax for schools like us that have meant that we've had to increase our subsidies for that top up action by 74,000 a year over the 9 years. So it's really about, whilst I can understand the ambition to pay down the deficit and return to a surplus, it is at the expense, by freezing the top up, by asking inclusive schools with high levels of SEN to dip into their pockets more to achieve what is mandatory and statutory under law. So I just want to emphasise that from a casework point of view, a case study point of view, decisions around freezing top up for the 9th year in a row is going to put additional pressure on stretch budgets for schools with high level SEN. That's the point, really. I'm sorry, I just realised I haven't switched my camera on, so apologies for not appearing on the screen. But
okay, thank you. I think we might come to the freezing the top up in a minute. So if we just park that for now, I think Claire, you raised your hand, then it went down, and then it came back up again. So, but you were next, I think. Claire, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, I think Phil will see that there's me, there's Lynn, and there's Becky, and we were all going to come in, and I'm sure we're gonna echo what Julia is saying. So if you want us to start that, then we will. Okay. But certainly it is something that we feel needs to be flagged up. Yeah.
Okay. So Becky, was it also about the freezing and top up? You're on mute.
I know, I'm absolutely, yeah. Okay, myself, Claire, and Lynn really strongly need to speak about this, please.
So we'll come back to that in a minute, Phil, I think, won't we? Unless we're not quite there yet, are we?
It's the next item, you'll be surprised to know. But yeah, so okay. I guess the question is there anything else around the kind of 3-year plan? And we may come back towards the 3-year plan and the position when we're talking about the freezing of top-ups, I guess. So it may be just wise to move on to that one, I guess, unless there's anything pressing.
Okay. Claire, did you want to come in again before then?
Yeah, okay. I mean, I know that Lynn has asked for a statement to be circulated, and it has been. But I guess all I was going to say was, I mean, Phil's 3-year plan, maybe what we should be putting alongside Phil's 3-year plan is the 3-year plan of all our schools, because with not increasing top-ups and with salaries going up, so by 2023-24, the cost of salaries in my school is going to, and all the other bits and pieces, is going to go up by 105,000. And even if we had a 2% rise on the top-ups, that's only going to give me 37,000. So as I said, it's fine looking at the local authority 3-year forecast, but I think it should be looked at alongside the individual forecasts for our schools, because we're all going to fall off a cliff in 3 years' time.
Okay, thank you. Phil, do you want to say something about the rationale for freezing the top up?
Well, yeah, I can. Can I just make a very quick point there, though, just linked to that? Okay. I think it's just really important for us to all recognise that this isn't a local authority versus schools situation here, and I guess this might be, you might consider this to be a local authority plan around high needs, but it's our dedicated schools grant, and this is why the forum exists. This is our deficit collectively. And whilst we have management and oversight of the high needs, 90% of it goes out to education institutions. It's not something the local authorities sat on. So I just, whilst I fully get where you're coming from, I just guess I wouldn't want it to be seen as Phil's plan or the local authorities' plan. It has to be ours as a collective. So just make that point. What I included in the forum papers was a bit of a view of what the increasing of top-ups would cost if we increase them by 1% and 2%. The reason I've done it to 2% is because the minimum funding levels were set at 2% this year. So any school in the national funding formula, after all the funding formulas had been calculated, if you hadn't received a minimum of 2% increase, that's where you were being brought up to. So it kind of felt like the right benchmark to be using to look at what it would cost us.
Okay.
Honestly, the rationale for continuing to freeze them is because I just don't want to see the deficit continuing to rise in high needs. It is a legacy issue that we're going to have to deal with, and you know, whilst I fully get and actually, you know, personally, I'm very supportive of the positions all the schools are taking. As somebody kind of responsible for overseeing this high needs budget within the LA, I have to kind of take a position of trying to get us back to a point where we're not increasing that deficit. Having said that, I did include the cost of the top ups for a reason, because I think we do have to have a really open debate, and I think we really need to understand where the schools forum is collectively on making a decision around this. Ultimately, it does sit with the local authority to make this decision because it's a high needs one, but we really want to get a kind of full picture of where you are on it. But it just needs to be in the context of the full picture, and I guess I remain concerned that the deficit, whilst we might not be at the top end of it, the deficit is a significant one, and at some stage we've got to start eating into that. And if we increase top ups, we're limiting our ability to do that.
Okay, thank you.
That's all from me. I'll open it up.
Thank you, Phil. Lynn, you've been very patient.
Yes, I will assume that everybody has read the email that I asked to be circulated. And there are a few issues within that. I support Julia wholeheartedly on the fact they've been frozen for a long time. To me, there's also an equality issue here that that the AWPU values have gone up for secondaries and primaries. And I know that's slightly different, but there has been no increase in the special schools. The place fundings remain the same. The top-ups have been frozen now for 9 years. And it ties into 2 points. Well, no, 1 point is that I haven't heard what we're doing to get the out-of-county budget spend down, because that impacts hugely on the high needs deficit. And my fear is, I put at the end of my email, that if we keep this pay freeze in place and the complexity of the children we've got in mainstream and special schools is going up and up, I know we are going to reach a point where we have to say we can't take these children because we can't afford the staff to keep these children safe. And that's not a veiled threat, that's a health and safety issue. And then the out-of-county spend will go up even more. And I'm feeling very frustrated about it. I'll hand over to one of my colleagues to have their say there. I don't want to hog the floor.
Okay, thank you. Peter, I think Pete Hales, I think you're next.
Yeah, my question was around, I think Phil had mentioned earlier, we're not in as bad a position as some of the other authorities. So what are the other authorities doing to readdress the balance? And is there any lessons that we can learn from other authorities? Or are they just taking the thought that, well, we're overspent, we've got to continue overspending because the needs of the pupils are dramatically increasing?
Phil, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, so we're engaged with a number of groups. Actually, Chris and I were both with the Southwest group this morning, talking about high needs position. I think broadly everybody's in the same boat. There's no panacea, there's no magic pill solution out there. There are a number of local authorities who are having conversations with the DFE and ESFA about recovery and how they might do that collectively. Those are right at the top end of the system, and we're kind of waiting to get really a little bit more information about how that operation plays out. But because we're not in that kind of really high risk group at the moment, we're not involved in those kind of conversations. What we're clear is it isn't the DFE coming in and saying, here, we're just going to write off the deficit. There's talk of kind of matched funding between local authority and DFE to try and resolve some of the pressures. But in terms of addressing it, like I say, there isn't a local authority out there who's saying we've solved this problem, because it's a level of need issue. It's a level of need issue, and everybody's seeing a rising level of need. I've included the data again This time around SEN2, you can see rising levels across the country nationally in SEN, and it's why I guess from my perspective I can see the continued investment and that the additional funding we're getting is getting us to a point where we can start to see a balance in the future. The recovery conversation or the recovery conversation, the cumulative deficit is an entirely different story. I guess my ambition is to get us to that balance point as quickly as I can, really.
Okay, thank you. Becky Martin.
Hi, yeah, just for those of you who don't know, I'm actually chair of governors of one of the special schools in Gloucestershire. So I am the third special school person that's going to speak in a row about the same topic. To be perfectly honest, I mean, you called it our plan and I know we're going to vote on it, but I can categorically tell you I'm also a parent of 2 profoundly disabled children in the special school system, and this is not my plan. I think it's very clear at point 1.10 where it says top-up funding and base funding has remained static for several years. And we all appreciate, Phil, you know, you're brilliant and you're trying to get your deficit down, but this is grossly unfair on the special schools. To hear from Julia the effect it's having on mainstream schools with a large SEN contingent is really worrying as well. But the special schools just cannot continue to put up salaries of teachers and all the things we have to do to increase our pupil support and have the same money. It cannot continue. And I would honestly almost beg the forum to consider just having the same increase as, you know, everything else. And in terms of the funding coming to Gloucestershire, maybe we could think of a larger plan of going to the government, going to the DfE and saying we don't have enough money in our county to run our schools. And I know it's been said before in this forum, but surely that must be the way we need to go if we cannot afford to, just in line with inflation, pay the special schools their base and top-up funding. Sorry if that sounds slightly ranty, but we're in a really desperate position, all of us.
Okay, thank you, Becky. Lynn, you want to come back in?
I think alongside this, it can't be ignored that the complexity of the children we're talking about has substantially increased in the last 10 years. And I've been doing this a very long time in this authority, and I can speak from experience of that. And it's the same in the mainstream schools. So we're asking schools to cope with much more complex children and not increase the funding for that in any way, shape or form. It feels morally wrong to me. But also there are there's a big number of children who have need a special school place and there aren't any available. So those mainstream schools are dealing with children who really should be in the special schools. And again, they're not getting that extra support that they should deserve and need. And I come back to this equality issue about we're not supporting these very vulnerable and very complex children if we just keep freezing the money available to meet their needs.
Okay, thank you, Lynn. Julia, I think you want to come back. Hello, Julia.
Hi, so I'm just trying to get my, you have to move your cursor everywhere. I guess I absolutely understand, and certainly the conversations that I've had with Phil in recent months, the sort of interconnectedness, if you like, of the different aspects of the budgets. My worry is that we might be going down the path of a false economy, because as Lynn said, the increasing complexity of needs that we're seeing in mainstream is leading to tough decisions. Sometimes we're having to look at permanently excluding children with complex needs because of the impact they're having on the learning environments around them, or we're having to campaign for EHCP reviews that move them into the special sector, which is probably a more appropriate avenue for support for those individuals. As the special sector then becomes oversaturated, we move into out-of-county placements, and so we end up in a vicious circle. And if we cut the money and the roots off, if you like, of the support at mainstream level to be able to do more in mainstream and the special school sector, we actually ultimately are storing up trouble where we're going to end up spending more on out-of-county placements and private placements that seems to be that costs umpteen times as much as it would were we to invest the money lower down. So I'm just worried that we're going to get ourselves into a vicious cycle where the balancing of the budget becomes the be all and end all, but actually we're just moving the problem further up the road.
Okay, thank you, Julia. Okay, Alison, I think you're next. Alison Berry.
Yeah, I was just going to ask. Obviously, I'm not within the school system. I'm a governor, but I come from a business environment of universities, and they're facing massive funding issues. I mean, obviously, the government is facing huge problems with the result of COVID. The furlough scheme, etc. We've got a biggest debt we've ever had in the country. Are we naive to think that if we did say we're not going to freeze it, we're going to top it up, is actually the government got any money to give? My impression is they haven't. So in a sense, are we asking to pull down extra money that just isn't there? So we are stuck in a no-win situation, which implies that actually all we can do is freeze it because there isn't the money to give. But maybe I'm not close enough to it.
I think, generally speaking, that it's probably never true that the government doesn't have the money. It just depends, or it can be true, but actually this is a case of prioritisation. Education spending is a case of prioritisation. It's how you prioritise education against other aspects of government funding, really, and that's obviously a battle between the DfE and the Treasury. So it's probably not the case the money isn't there, but it's as to whether it's being prioritised sufficiently. I would suggest. Sarah, you want to say something? Sarah Murphy.
Thank you. This is a question for Phil, really. I mean, from my perspective, there's been a really powerful argument from Lynn and others about increasing the top up. But obviously that would have an impact on increasing our deficit and delaying us possibly having a surplus. What would be the consequence of that? Is there any consequence? So what would be the consequence of the forum saying, yeah, we agree that we should see a 2% increase? What might be the impact with the local authority, Phil?
What beyond the financial one, you mean, in terms of the?
Is there a consequence to us extending the period that we run a deficit?
To be honest, this is not a really easy one to answer. There is a current position where the local authorities are not having to report these. Now, Sue probably knows the detail around that a little bit better than I do, actually. But that is only a 2 or 3 year position. At some stage, that's going to kick back in, and we will be responsible for trying to address this issue. So ultimately, the consequence for us at this stage is that we're going to have to contribute, going to have to make some kind of recovery into this, regardless of whether it's getting support from the DfE or not. There's going to be some kind of recovery we're going to have to make, and the higher we make the deficit now, the more that's going to hit us in the future. That's, I guess, my worry, and I see it totally from both sides of this argument.
Okay, thank you. I think it's Lynn. Lynn wants to come back, and then Chris. Lynn.
Yeah, we have a statutory duty to meet the educational health and care plans of these children that we're talking about, and we can't just say, "Oops, we can't afford to do that." Parents, Ofsted, there's an expectation that we meet those EHCPs, and if we reach a point where we can't, then the county will suffer because more and more schools will be becoming requires improvement, which would be very sad. And also, going back to, I think it was what Julia said, the government will say, we are giving extra money to high needs. We gave 6.9 million last year and this year. Sadly, that's just been swallowed up within the deficit. It's not actually getting to the children who need it. And just as a point of reference, there is a huge national campaign going on with the DfE and via MPs to increase the actual place funding for special schools, which would help considerably.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Chris Spencer. You might be on mute. Thank you.
I'm just a bit slow at finding my fat fingers in the right buttons and coordinating. Thanks, Andrew. I mean, this is a really tricky backdrop, and I'll start by saying, you know, certainly Phil and I have discussed this, and we're certainly not unsympathetic to the special school case. But I do want people to kind of understand the backdrop to this, because, you know, we have the world according to us being those of us with an interest in education, and we also have the world, you know, more broadly that impacts on local authorities, and we have to operate within that. I mean, what we heard this morning, Phil and I, when we were debating this with colleagues in the Southwest, is that really this scenario is a consequence of a standoff between the DfE and MHCLG, which is local authorities, about who owns this deficit. Now, what the government have said, they'll give us a 3-year holiday to sort this out, hence our 3-year plan. At the end of that 3-year period, the debt will revert and become real. In a sense, what they're allowing us to do is exactly what people are suggesting, and that's kick the can down the road. Now, we're in a
Chris, I think,
you know,
I don't know if it's me, I think you're breaking up.
Comfortable position compared to some
Chris,
authorities, but we're still carrying a big debt. And
Chris, we can't hear you.
just to paint a black picture and answer the question about ultimately what is the...
He's back.
Okay.
Yeah, that's better. Yeah.
I can do that.
It's this lag delay, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm moving. Can you hear?
Much better. Yes.
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 Hello? And what I'm as you can probably tell. So yeah, so yeah. You know, I was just to paint a black picture, because somebody said ultimately, what's the consequence of us not addressing the is that in some authorities the deficit on the high exceeds the general grant carry forward, and if any of you have ever been involved in management, that equals insolvency. And in local government, we have a process called a Section 114, where an alternative manager of the county finances would be commissioned to run the budget of the council. It's happened in Northamptonshire recently. So it's really important that we don't get into that kind of scenario. And we're not in that. I mean, Gloucestershire financially is a well-run county and does have reserves, and we do have carry forward. So we're not in that scenario, but ultimately it does illustrate the importance of having to manage this current scenario, because it will become real again in 3 years' time, and we'll be facing a prospect of how we deal with an £18 million deficit. So, you know, as I say, we're absolutely not unsympathetic to the case. We think it's a strong case, but I do want people to understand the backdrop to this, and that we're not in any way not giving it full consideration, I suppose is the best way of expressing it.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. Claire Steele.
Right. I just wonder whether Phil could clarify in terms of the 3-year budget moving forward to 23-24. Does that include an increase in places in the maintained special sector or not? Because I know that, you know, we've been our numbers have been increased to meet our capacity, so that we say can't get any more children in our schools now. We're being funded to capacity. But I also know that all of our schools are being asked to take extra children if we can possibly squeeze them in. But what I don't know is if whether those figures that Phil has put in there include an increase in special school places. In terms of us linking with primary schools, I mean, obviously at the moment we're all doing primary school visits or we're doing primary school visits for transition. We went into a school yesterday and we will be taking 2 of their children. They called my deputy head an angel for rescuing them because these children have been trying to survive in a mainstream school for years before they could get access to a special school provision. And the schools, despite all their best efforts, have not been able to meet those children's needs. And that's just one example. That's happened a number of times. But the schools are now full to capacity. So what is the local authority going to do? I know that there are rumours going around about extra places, but have those all been built into the budget for the high needs over the next 3 years? If not, they're going to go to specialist provision, like Lynn said.
Yeah. So the budget and 3-year plan assumes trends rising in the same way that they've risen over the last 2 to 3 years. So that modelling includes increases in mainstream, increases in specialist, and increases in independent. But actually, with a reduction in the independent, the outer county, because of the new provision that's being put in place of the SEMH school, etc. So that's the only area where we've kind of got at the top end a small reduction in the rise, the trend rise that we've seen.
I think the special schools, Phil, would be really interested to see how many places you're anticipating adding to the special school sector over the next 3 years, and also where you think they're going to be.
I'm happy to bring that to the Heads Association meeting if you like, if that's the right place to do that. Yeah.
Thank you. Can I just ask a technical question? And this is because I don't have a great understanding of special school funding. So there's £10,000 base funding, and then the EHC top up on top of that. So within that, and I apologise in advance if this is a stupid question, where is the additional funding made available for the teachers and pay and pensions grants?
So the pay and pension grants paid on top, isn't it? It's a separate.
And is that still the case when it goes into the national funding formula for mainstream?
So schools will get their allocation of teacher pay and pension grant as a separate. Neil might be able to respond better to the actual detail of how that happens, but it's paid separately. It's not part of the top up of the base.
Yeah, it has become part, like the mainstream schools. It's become part of the main budget. It was included into the high needs block as opposed to being a separate grant. And then in 21-22, there's been a separate payment on top of the place funding and the top up funding specifically for the replacement for the grant.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, thank you for that. It's just that obviously the numbers that Lynn has, I think, fairly accurately quoted do include those grants being incorporated into the national funding formula. And I just wanted to check that that consideration was also in place for special schools, which clearly it is. Apologies for if that was a bit of a diversion. Pete Hales. You might be on mute, Pete. Oh, you're gone. Okay. Does anybody?
Sorry, I've raised my hand by mistake, Andrew. So
all right. Okay. No problem. No problem. Does anybody else have any points they wish to make about high use funding, and particularly the recommendation that we have on the screen in front of us, which is to freeze top-up funding at the current level? So any points that anybody else wants to make before we consider the recommendation? Phil.
Andrew, can I just make one point? I think as we consider it, what we could consider from a forum perspective is a discussion around, or a view around what's proposed, a view around the potential for looking at increasing top-ups in specialist provision, in mainstream, or in both, and whether there's a view that actually those things are linked. I say that not wanting to make myself any more unpopular than I already am, But what Lynn makes a solid point earlier, which is that mainstream provision has continued to see uplifts in funding through the national funding formula or PU, etc. That has been a reflection that specialist provision hasn't seen. And I fully take Julia's point that the schools that are most inclusive, are penalised in that situation in the mainstream. I fully understand that. But it might be that if we were kind of reaching a compromise around this, it might be that actually the area of the sector that's been most affected over the last few years has been specialist provision. And it's just me putting that, I guess, on the table for consideration. I don't know how you want to treat that, Andrew.
Okay,
sorry.
thank you. I'll come to you in a minute, Lynn. So effectively, we would be splitting the recommendation into two parts. So there'd be one recommendation, which is that the top-up funding remains frozen for mainstream, and another recommendation that it would remain frozen for special schools. And we take those two recommendations separately, perhaps. Is that what you're thinking of, Phil?
I mean, I think the other recommendation on top of that is that they both stay frozen. But
yes.
I can feel the appetite for that one.
If both of those recommendations are accepted, then they would both stay frozen. Is that?
I see what you mean. Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
Before we do that, though, Lynn, you want to come in?
I just wanted to ask. I posed the question about what are we doing to reduce other costs within the high needs. Are we negotiating down the cost of out-of-county places? I'm sure you try. And also, what happened to, am I right in thinking the advisory teacher service is paid for out of the high needs block? Because there was meant to be a review of that service.
Yeah, so they're working on, so ATS is paid for out of high needs, and they are looking at a full review of the service. That has been impacted by COVID, that review. So it's probably something that could come later in the autumn to forum, I think, probably in the November one, I think.
I think it has an impact, because much as I'm sure everyone would like to keep that service, we're talking about the actual on the ground dealing with these children day to day, and the increasing complexity with what will have to be reducing staff ratios that becomes dangerous around health and safety. So I'm just feeling as though freezing the top up seems like the quickest and easiest thing to do, but I don't think it is the best thing to do.
No, I don't disagree with you. I think if we were at a stage where we were able to make recommendations around reducing costs elsewhere, I don't think that would necessarily change this discussion now, because it won't materially impact that position in the deficit, and certainly not the cumulative position in a way that would, like be a panacea. It's not a panacea making that kind of change. So it's always still going to be a debate, but I totally take the point, and we will bring recommendations around that back up.
Thank you, Claire.
I'd just like to say that even if you don't freeze the top ups and they increase by 2%, that doesn't change significantly in terms of provision and meeting the needs of these children. So I wouldn't like forum members to think all we need is 2% on our top ups and we're happy. And we can do everything we want to do, because we can't. If you actually look at the total amount of money we're talking about, we're only talking about £268,000 across all the special schools. If you increase the top ups by 2%, it's not a lot of money. So we know there are a lot bigger issues, but this is just a tiny bit, and we do feel very strongly that we shouldn't let this go. I mean, we've got the bandings as they are, and an E-banding, which is the top banding that we get in special schools, which if we need a one-to-one support for a child in a special school, because believe you me, we do need one-to-one for some of our children, straight away that is actually costing the school an extra £2,500, because the banding, the top up, does not pay for a one-to-one support in a special school. So you've got a half a dozen of those children, and in schools like Lynn's you're going to have more than that you're losing money every single time, whether you get that 2% or not. So I do think that needs needs to be flagged up as well. But I would also like to support my mainstream colleagues, because going in and seeing what they are doing for the children with these most complex needs, that I'm looking at these children thinking they should have been in a specialist provision years ago, and they're telling me it's taken 3 or 4 years to get to this point. And it's not all because of the EP service. I mean, the EPs have been gatekeepers as long as I can remember to an EHCP. And, you know, it's not just about getting the provision into these schools early. These children possibly are just not in the right place. You know, there is a limit on what the mainstream schools can do to support these children. So yeah, I mean, obviously I will not be voting to freeze the top ups, but it won't solve the problem even if I get 2%. Thank you, Phil.
Okay, thank you.
But it's a help, Claire.
It's a help, of course it's a help, Lynn. Every little bit counts.
But it's about equity for me. It's about, you know, the AWPU values have gone up, but there's been no increase in any way, shape or form of funding for these very vulnerable children. It feels very wrong to me.
Okay, thank you. We are going to have to move to a consideration of the recommendation in a minute. Rhiann.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to thank you, Claire. I'm from the mainstream area here. Just to echo what you said, you know, we're a school where we have a disproportionate amount of children with EHCPs, not because we're an area with a disproportionate amount of children, but because the other primary schools, this might be a bit controversial, effectively kind of exclude children with special needs because they cannot cope with them. And because we're a school that does and tries our best, we have got to provide a massive provision, and we take them, and even under appeal we're getting given more and more children, and we love them and we embrace them and we do our best for them, but we do not have enough money. We do not have the specialist training even for the staff because the funding for them just isn't there. So we are doing our best, but I know our special needs coordinator is drowning, and you know, we're going to end up also with mental health issues from our staff who are desperately trying to help these children, can see it in real time every day, but we just haven't got enough. And you're absolutely right in that whole children then with complex special needs probably needing to go to special schools, but there's not enough provision at special schools. The reality is, in our society, there's more and more children who have different complex special needs for various reasons. And I know we might be pushing something down the line, but maybe just helping the children that we've got right now, and hoping that there's different ways of tackling this or approaching it, or different governments or whatever may happen. And that might be a bit of a frivolous way of looking at it, but I see it on every day. And so I think I want to look at it like that.
Okay, thank you. Just a couple more questions then, or points, and then we'll look at the recommendations. So Sarah Murphy.
Hello, Andrew. You suggested, it was either you or Phil suggested, that there was perhaps 2 alternatives here. So the mainstream not receiving an increase, but the special schools do, or both do, or both don't. I'd like to suggest that there is another option where the mainstream may, or a proposal to put to the forum, that the mainstream may receive 1% and the special schools 2%. So there is another option to consider that I'd like to propose as a possibility.
Okay, I'm not entirely sure how we can make that into an efficient voting process, but I'll think about that. Becky Martin.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to thank Rhiann for her comments about staff. I agree with Lynn totally, obviously, about pupil fairness, but where we are putting more and more pressure on our staff in terms of not having enough staff to look after particularly behavioural issues and complex medical needs, where we are putting on our staff constantly, we just we can't rely on staff goodwill. And Sarah Murphy from the unions, I'm sure, would agree that we need to be looking after the mental well-being of our staff and not asking them to take on more and more because we've got less and less people. And it is just people we need to look after these children. Our trained, wonderful teaching assistants, of which we've got hundreds, we need them to look after our children. And we can't cut back anymore. And in order to give the pay rise that quite rightly we've got to give to our staff every year, we can't afford it. So where do we draw the line? Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, what I would like to suggest is that to begin with, we take two recommendations, and I'd like to take special schools first. And the recommendation then is recommendation 1, as it is on the screen, but only applied to special schools. And then we'll take a recommendation 1B or something, which will be the same again for secondary schools. For mainstream schools. And this is on the basis that if people do not approve for the recommendation, what they are recommending is a 2% increase. So in other words, if you approve the recommendation, then you are approving a recommendation that top-up funding remains frozen. If you're not approving the recommendation, then you're recommending that there's a 2% increase in top-up funding. Is there anybody who's unhappy with that arrangement for trying to get a handle on this? Okay, now because there are some people who I think possibly don't know how to raise their hands, I mean, I don't mean physically, but I mean on WebEx, then, and because I can't see many people on screen at once, then this is a rather mind-numbing process. In that what we have to do, unless Joe can think of a better way, is we have to go round the whole meeting, whole membership, and people in turn have to say either they are in favour or not in favour of the recommendation. Joe, there's no better way of doing it, is there?
No, there isn't. I think we do need to.
If you stop sharing the screen, you'll see more people.
Yeah, but
I've learned how to do my hands up, so I have worked out to do it. So I'm gonna go on the hands.
Okay.
Joe, we're going to see, is that going to be impossible to count? I think we need to go round, don't we?
Andy?
Yeah?
Are you, if we, do you think we could do it by hands if both me and you count the number of hands?
I think it's probably best if we go through and we do a for or against, Joe, just to make sure we don't miss anyone.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah,
I think so.
Okay.
Phil, could you put the slide back on the screen, please, so we can see the recommendation? Okay, so when I get to you, if you could make sure you're not on mute, please. So recommendation 1A then is exactly that, but as applied to special schools only, and that if you do not approve the recommendation, then you're requesting a 2% increase in top-up. Okay. Any questions about this before we start? Okay. So I'll go through the list that I have in order then. So Alex Norman.
Against.
So it's against.
Andrew, can I just suggest you ask each person to do both? Because then you'll only have to go around everyone once.
I could do that. Yes, it would certainly be more efficient. I was just trying to keep it simple, but I'll be brave. I'll be brave, and we'll try.
So
we'll try.
I'll do mine. I'm against A and against B.
Okay. So A,
sorry,
just
Andrew,
to be.
Can I just say, are we abandoning the possibility of doing 1% and 2% for mainstream? We're just keeping
At the moment, I think it's overly complex, and we'll see how this ends up, and then think about the 1%. So just to be, so recommendation A is for special. Recommendation B is for mainstream. And 4 is to say that you are in favour of the freezing, and against means that you are in favour of an increase in top-up funding. So Alex, thank you. So that was against both. Alison Berry.
I'm for both.
For both, okay. Amanda Horniman.
Against both.
Andrea Griffiths. Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon.
Sorry.
Sorry, no. Sorry, my brain wasn't engaged. Becky Martin.
Against both, please.
Becky Poulter-Jewson. I think you might be on mute.
I'm sorry, I'm dyslexic, so I'm really confused with what you're doing. But basically, I want the money to go to the schools. So
Okay.
To go to the
So against both recommendations, then, yeah. Claire.
Against both.
Gwyneth.
Against both.
Helen. Helen Bond.
I've got to be honest and say, I don't know if I've got voting rights on this, but if I have, I'd like to vote against both.
Okay. I think you have. Yeah.
Yeah.
Kirsten.
Against both.
Thank you. Julia.
Against both.
Thank you. Kate. Kate Hawkins.
Kate Hawkins, right. Against both.
Okay, thank you. Lynn.
Against both.
Would have been surprised if you hadn't been. Peter. Pete Hales.
Against both.
Thank you. Pete Nolan.
Against both.
Okay. Rebecca Hartson.
Sorry, who was that?
I beg your pardon. I'm so
No.
sorry. Right, Rianne. Sorry, I'm
Against both.
Thank you. Sarah.
Against both.
Thank you. Stephen.
Against both.
Okay. Stephen Dean.
That was Stephen Dean. So if you're now asking Stephen Davis.
Oh, are you? I'm sorry. All right.
Stephen Davis for both.
For both. Okay, thank you. Suzanne. Oh, no, sorry. Will Morgan.
Against both, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Andrew?
Sorry, Joe.
Sorry. Cabinet members can't vote. I wasn't sure whether.
Oh, sorry. I do beg your pardon.
I was wondering that.
I'm so sorry. Yes,
Yeah. Sorry.
I skipped Philip Robinson on that basis, but I didn't skip Stephen
Okay,
Davis.
so
I do
can I-
apologise. Yeah.
Can I go back? Stephen Dean, were you for or against?
Against both. True.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right. Joe, have I covered everybody in the meeting, or have I skipped anybody?
Got Will Morgan.
Yeah. He was against both.
Okay.
I appreciate I asked some people that I shouldn't ask as well, but
Matthew Bishop, is he in the meeting? No.
no, I don't think so.
Joe, looking at my list, I just Lisa Jones and Andrew, yourself, if you're voting.
Yeah, Lisa Jones has left, so Andrew.
I don't think normally I do vote, do I? As chair? Only
Yes,
if it's
you vote.
casting vote.
Casting vote only.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, you do have a vote, Andrew.
I know. I would vote against both.
Okay, I think that's everybody.
Okay. I mean, clearly there's Was that unanimous, Joe?
Andrew?
Was that unanimous?
There was one for, wasn't there, for both? But apart from that, everybody else.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So overwhelmingly, then the
Yeah.
recommendation from Schools Forum would be that top-up funding is increased by 2%, and that the recommendations, or the recommendation in the papers that are that Schools Forum don't approve that recommendation, but would request a 2% increase in top-up funding. Okay. Thank you. I think we now move on to the early years. Sorry, is there anything else on high needs? Sorry, Phil. Yes, there is a bit actually. Yes, there is. Sorry. Sorry. Yes, there is.
I'm really sorry. There is more on high needs. Yeah. So there was a second recommendation, which was that we set an approved high needs deficit of 3.5 million, or just over 3.5 million for 21-22.
Yeah.
That would now increase if, on the basis of the previous by just over £500,000.
Okay.
To just over 4 million.
So is it okay to approve the recommendation or not, on the basis of it being just over 4 million without there being an accurate number there? I mean, I think that's entirely appropriate myself to do that. Is that okay, Phil?
I don't have an issue with it, and then Joe's.
Okay. So can I ask then if there are any members who do not approve that a high needs deficit of just over 4 million is set for 21-22? Anybody want to? Okay.
It's indicating, Andrew.
Nobody. Okay, thank you very much. So so that approval is in place from Schools Forum for that altered recommendation according to what the number actually is now. Okay, thank you. So from there, Phil, there are a few more bits and pieces with high needs.
Yeah, so I was just providing an update on some of the programme work and activity around, funnily enough, reducing the deficit position. So I included written updates on a number of areas. So development of the new SEMH school, that is built into the financial modelling. That is on track, and that will reduce the need for out-of-county placements in the longer term. Currently, unless it's either COVID or Brexit affected by building delays, it's due to open September next year. And it's currently on track to do that, but it is quite a tight timescale. So any kind of supply type issues, etc., would affect the build. But that's on track, and I include an update on that. Spend redesign project. So this is where I've been looking at the change in the funding model, and I think given the previous conversations, quite timely one. So we've got approval to move towards a common banding system, and Tracy Easthausen and her team have been kind of engaging with different parts of the sector around this. What's going to happen over the next few months now is that we need to get the core elements of the funding system locked down, in agreement with the key stakeholders on basically the descriptors. So for each of the 4 areas of need, we're identifying and putting together the descriptors that match the bands and need to agree those. I know some of that has happened, but there is more work to do around finalising that and making sure we're all comfortable. There's a communication coming out from me to heads of associations on that, hopefully tomorrow, but certainly no later than Monday. And the aim really is to get the descriptors and the provision associated provision maps locked down by the end of July, so that we can start to look at the funding associated to this. as part of this piece of work, what we are going to do is unearth some of the issues that we've just been talking about. Really, what we're looking at is what are the descriptors of the level of need, what should provision look like to support that, and what is the cost of that provision, and aligning that to the new banding system. Once we've got the descriptors and the provision mapping down, we then need to look at exactly how that's funded, with a view to having short pilot in the autumn term. So that's pressing forward. The other part to that model is we're looking at how we can provide funding outside of the statutory process as part of that. So alongside the graduated pathway, graduated response. So if there are children who have maybe a relatively high level of need, but short-term need, that with support and intervention, that need could be addressed, thinking particularly around SEMH, etc. there, that actually we're able to provide support outside of the statutory process and not direct everybody towards the EHCP, which has been the issue in the past. And then the third update was around kind of the alternative provision. And I kind of outlined in there our priorities around this, and we know that there is a real need to invest in and reshape the way that we're offering AP, and that we've talked in the past that there's a concern that access to alternative provision is really through the statutory process, through permanent exclusion. And if we really want to get to a system that is predicated and underpinned by good early intervention, we need to adjust the way that AP is funded to reflect that, so they're able to work more dynamically with the system, providing earlier intervention, support services, outreach, partnership type work. Alongside that, we've also identified, the need for investment and support around different parts of the AP system. That includes buildings and accommodation, which, much like other local authorities, it was a key outcome of the Timpson review, is quality of AP buildings and learning environments. We're looking at how we improve those and have plans around the development of primary specifically, but also the improvement of the existing sites. And then a final part in there that really trying to focus on is how we improve their access to therapeutic support and interventions, and improve the quality of what we're able to offer through AP. And some of that is around how we access support through agencies like ATS, EP service, also through through CAMS. And someone from within the EP service is going to be leading a piece of work on how we improve therapeutics. So starting point on that is a review of the current offer in AP, recommendations on how we develop that further. The kind of key recommendation that came out of all of that, and the thing relevant around funding specifically, is a change in the way that we are looking to operate the funding model for AP. We still need places for children that are permanently excluded. We still obviously have permanent exclusion. So the current model, which is based on a base fund of 10k, like the special schools, and then a top up, will continue for those commissioned places. But where we're not using those commissioned places and there's capacity in the system, we want to be able to use some of that funding to provide earlier intervention support services and provide more flexibility to the schools to be able to do that, working with the mainstream system, which is where that recommendation came from. So I'll stop there and leave open for questions, comments.
Does anybody have any questions or comments about the Hindies programme update? Okay.
Not seeing Andrew.
Okay.
No one's
okay, thank you. So we have a recommendation. I beg your pardon. Sorry, Claire.
Sorry, Phil. So does that mean that if the alternative provisions aren't up to capacity, they will provide additional outreach to local schools where there are children in those that not at the point of exclusion, don't need the AP full time, but they might need some additional support? Is that what the plan is?
That is exactly the aim, yeah. To move us away from a point where the only way to access AP is via PECs, basically, and then that will ultimately support them to work with children struggling to access education earlier. That's the idea, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Phil. And Lynn? Lynn, you might be on mute.
You're on mute, Lynn.
Just a voice of support, because I think the pressure on the alternative provision service is going to be huge in light of COVID and mental health issues that have arisen and are arising.
Okay, thank you, Lynn. So we have a recommendation as on the screen. So to enable schools to deliver the new service offer, local authority recommending the 21-22 Honeys budget, soon full funding be made available to alternative provision schools in that year. Does anybody wish to make any comment against that recommendation? In that case, I will take it that the Schools Forum approves that recommendation. Thank you very much. Okay. Phil, EHCP trends.
Yeah, so as I've done in previous forums, just really providing an update on where we are in terms of the numbers, and with the SEND2 data just published, I thought it was particularly relevant to show some comparisons there. So the data team have produced a bit of an overview of where we are in terms of our SEM position, obviously highly relevant to the rising level of need in the system. This kind of gives a bit of an overview in 4 areas. What we're seeing is our total number of EHCPs are kind of remaining broadly in line with the national and our statistical neighbours, but the rate of new plans has been rising more quickly, which, I mean, overall, I guess if we continue to see that rising rate, we will start to see us passing those statistical neighbours. And the other area is that initial requests are rising. Again, still lower than our statistical neighbours, so they've been rising more sharply, but still lower in total. So you can see ours was up from 613 to 700, whereas our statistical neighbours were up from 820 to 839, so a much smaller increase, but from a higher starting point. So that SEN2 data is a data set that's just been released nationally now. And like I said earlier, at the point we were covering the actions, we're just looking at a much more detailed report around the trends in trends in SEN locally and nationally, so we can share that with Forum in much more detail than the kind of headlines that I tend to provide, because it's, the headlines give us a kind of picture of the high level trend, but it's not getting down into detail. And we do have access to much more on this that we can share. Overall, what we're seeing still is nationally a rise, locally a rise, but proportionately a slightly higher rise locally. Exclusion data, I have included it again because it remains a key driver, obviously, behind parent exclusion, or less so now that we've approved a slightly different way of working around PECs. And as I said in the report, the kind of focus moving forward will be more on our ability to impact around preventative work and reducing kind of costs in the system. Where schools have been open through the periods this year, permanent exclusion has been broadly in line with previous years. So the periods where schools have been fully open, exclusion has been broadly in line. Overall, obviously, the numbers are down because there've been big periods of time when schools have been closed. Not necessarily finance related, but just an interesting piece of data associated to that is that the reason for exclusion has changed a little during that period. Consistently, we would see normally 85% of exclusions linked to persistent disruptive behaviour, but during this year we have seen acts of violence increase quite significantly. So actually persistent disruption is now operating just above 50% of the total, and what we're seeing is more physical acts of violence throughout the period. And again, it's something now we're looking into in terms of understanding that picture. Yeah, so that's kind of everything around the high needs position that I wanted to update on. I don't know if there's any further questions on any of those last elements.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions or comments about that data? Okay, thank you. In the papers, there was a copy of the DFE consultation on high needs national funding formula. Is there anything that we need to say about that, or is that really just there for members' information?
It's there for information. I think I said in the papers, and I've said repeated in a number of different forums over the last few months, that was a bit of a stopgap consultation for 1 year. We are expecting later this year a more detailed high needs consultation on the funding formula. I also mentioned it's toward. I'll come to it because it's at the end. So I'll pick up the F40 stuff and COVID stuff. Sorry.
Okay, all right, thank you. So now move on to agenda item 9 about the early years block.
Yep. So we've provided details of the 21-22 budget for early years and a recommendation that this one's approved. Basically, this is reflecting the increases in hourly rates that are recommended by the government, and we've been funded directly for that. So, Sue, I don't know whether there's anything further you want to say about the earliest one, because it's one you've pulled together, isn't it?
And I think it's fairly straightforward in terms of the central costs, include the children's centre, the quality team, and support overheads, and all the increase for the rates have been included in the entitlement. So that allows us to pay the increased rates which the government have provided in the funding across 2 providers.
Okay, thank you. Gwyneth.
Can I just ask on this a very simple but maybe overly obvious question? If, based on the recommendation, what happens if someone lives in Monmouth and they attend a setting in Ross and Wye, for example? Who funds that? Is that the Welsh Council or the English?
On the next recommendation around the cross-border funding stuff. Oh,
sorry if I jumped ahead. Sorry.
you might have done a little bit.
Should we just take this recommendation first, and then we'll come on to the cross-border.
Yeah, that's fine.
Cross-border entertainment. Okay. So, sorry, is there anything else about the earliest budget before we take that recommendation that's on the screen? Okay. So can I ask if anybody would be unhappy with the recommendation on the screen? So therefore, I take the feeling of the meeting that we are in favour of that recommendation. Okay. Thank you. Cross-border funding.
Yeah. So this one's an interesting one that's been coming up as a challenge for our early years team for a little while now, where we've got children and young people living in Gloucestershire who are attending settings across the border in Wales who are unable to access 3 to 4 year old funding. And actually what is happening in some certain circumstances is parents are engaging with early years provision, early on, 0 to 2, etc., and then finding out as they get towards the older age range that they're not eligible for the funding that they would receive if that setting was in England. We have explored this in detail with the DFE, and it's a DWP issue as well, and there is no resolution to it that through policy level. So what they've suggested is that we do what other local authorities do, which is to fund through the 5% in our early years. DSG if we are minded to do so. And I think, you know, what Sarah Hilton and the early years team, and I know they've talked to early years forum about this, I think already, haven't they, Gwyneth? As I understand it, what they're keen to do is be able to provide support where families have been put in a position where they are now not eligible for funding through no fault of their own, that we're able to provide that additional funding for 3 to 4-year-olds. So it's a cross-border England and Wales issue, this one. So it's detailed in the report. Obviously, Gwyneth, you have a question, so maybe we start there, shall we?
Yeah, being slightly of cross-border myself, being a Welsh person living in England, but I'm just interested really in how the like I said, if someone is living in Monmouth and accesses the setting in Ross and Wye, who funds that? Is that the Welsh Council or the Welsh contingency pot or our contingency pot? I can't answer, but I'll just wait for you to say.
Do you? Because I was going to say that's probably one I would have to take. Well, I haven't got details of the other way around.
I think it is that we fund that as well. And so my only question really, I think I might be wrong, Phil, but I think that's what it is. Because I've had that myself, because we live my Hartbury setting is quite close, and we have had a couple of people that's happened to. So my only question really would be then, how does the Welsh contingency pot get around the parental preference not being funded? And if they have an answer to that, and because they're not funding it, can't we use the same answer without striking up Offa's Dyke once again?
I mean, I can say I don't know enough about the way it works the other way around, I'm afraid. I can look into that. I guess, regardless of kind of how it does work the other way, I guess the question is, do we in principle agree that parents in Gloucestershire who are being disadvantaged in this way should receive some additional support around it? It is a hard one to quantify, I think you'll notice in the report. And I think Sarah and her team are very keen to make sure this is managed and chaperoned very well, so it doesn't become a free-for-all. You can see in the report there's a number of things they'll make sure happen before any funding is allocated. So yeah, I don't know if there's any other questions around this one.
I mean, certainly the criteria, those 4 bullet points, are very helpful. And as you say, it certainly wouldn't be a free-for-all. Are there any other questions about this before we move to the recommendation? Okay, so the recommendation then is that the forum agrees that early years block funding is used to fund cross-border requests based on the criteria that are on page 47 of the papers. Sorry, Chris, you have your hand up.
Sorry, I was a little slow in putting it up. Yeah, I mean, the previous lead member for Children's Services was very exercised about this issue, because he got regular letters from Gloucestershire residents who live on the borders of Wales, who place their children in Welsh nurseries and under 5 provision generally. Who, every time I speak, my phone goes off. And the issue is that we don't get the funding from the DFE for that reciprocal arrangement in the same way as we do with, say, Worcestershire, Herefordshire, or any other local authority that we border. So, you know, the DFE had been taken to judicial review by parents on this matter as well. So it is quite a hot issue at a national level for authorities that border Wales. But the fact is that we don't get funding to fund English parents who choose to place children in Welsh settings, and that reciprocal arrangement that exists elsewhere doesn't exist in those circumstances. So we would have to take the hit from that 5% that we retain. It is a real cost to us for which we can't reclaim that cost. So that's the situation.
Okay. Right. Any other comments or questions about that then? Okay, so if we move to the recommendation itself, so accepting, or if we were to accept the recommendation, we would be accepting that this is a hit on Gloucestershire finance, with no reciprocal arrangement arise from children who live in Wales attending Gloucestershire schools. Accepting that, so the recommendation then, as on the screen, that the Forum agrees to use early years block to fund cross-border requests based on the criteria. I'll ask if there's anybody who is unhappy with that recommendation, given everything that's been said. No? Okay, in that case...
I'm not happy with it.
Okay.
but I'll probably accept it. That's the best I can give you, Andrew.
Okay, all right. In that case, I'll change my words. Is there anybody who's not willing to accept that recommendation? Okay, in that case, that would go forward as a recommendation from Schools Forum. Thank you very much. Okay, and now move on to review of the Constitution of Schools Forum. Jo, I think this is something you're going to talk to us about. Thank you.
Yeah, so the Constitution has been updated to reflect that schools forums can now meet remotely on a permanent basis. Previously, the regulations only allowed that until March of this year. So the first recommendation is to approve those track changes in the Appendix 1, which shows the Constitution. And the second recommendation sets out the options for holding future forum meetings. And they're listed on the screen now. So it'd be good to hear from members how they wish to proceed.
Okay. So can we take the changes to the Constitution first?
Yeah.
And then recommendation 2, or do they have to go together?
No, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Makes sense.
Because, okay. So first of all, is there anybody who is unhappy about recommendation 1, who has concerns about the proposed changes to the Constitution in Appendix 1? Okay, so we'll take it recommendation 1 is accepted. And then in terms of how we actually operate, we have those 3 options. So it's to continue to hold forum meetings remotely, to go back to visiting Shire Hall every so often, or to have hybrid meetings where some people are at Shire Hall and other people are at home, and I guess those in Shire Hall will have screens up and so on. So any views about recommendation 2 that anybody would like to express? Alison.
I wonder whether an option is maybe of the 4 meetings to have one, have one completely physical and then maybe have one remote, have a slightly different option. Because I think, for somebody who's new to this, it would be very useful to meet everyone and have more face to face. But could we perhaps say, one meeting, COVID rules applies, is a physical one. The next one is either a hybrid or a remote one. So sort of have a variety in the 4 meetings as an option.
Okay, thank you, Alison. Helen.
Thank you. I would support that broadly. For parent carers, it's often very difficult to attend in person, but equally, it's very useful occasionally to have meetings at times which are a little bit more considerate of being within the school day, and I appreciate that's not the same for everybody, where they can attend, because it does help to build relationships and to help them feel more comfortable engaging in this kind of meeting. It can be very daunting coming into a meeting first time when you're at home alone, and to sort of, to build confidence in the process, it can be very useful to have in-person meetings.
Okay, thank you. Sarah.
I agree with the previous 2 comments. I think it would be a shame if we completely and constantly went to just Zoom meetings. I think we'd lose an awful lot by not being able to have that cup of coffee and quick conversation beforehand and catching people afterwards. It would be a shame to lose at least 1 meeting or 2 meetings a year that were hybrid. or an expectation that people attended in person.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Chris.
Yeah, can I just check? I'm sorry, I'm sure Joe will have checked this, but given this is a statutory meeting and there has been government rulings on members having to meet face to face, can I just check that there's no requirement for us to meet face to face as there is for other or some other council meetings?
No, Chris, the schools forums come under different regulations. Okay. So they can meet remotely on a permanent basis now if they choose to do so. It sits outside committee regulations.
I just wanted to check because obviously if it was different from that, then the debate is obsolete. Yeah, thanks, Andrew.
Okay, thank you. Becky. Becky
yeah,
Martin.
Hiya, sorry. Just quickly, I agree. It would be, I think it would be positive to meet in person where and when possible and not have everything by Zoom. I also just wanted to agree with what Helen said about the timings of these meetings always being from 2 till 4 is very difficult for those of us with children. And I know that's maybe a selfish thing to say, but I just wanted to agree that maybe occasionally they could be in the morning, but thank you.
Okay, thank you. Phil.
I'm not sure I necessarily get to vote as such, but I was just going to say I think one of the things we have noticed is actually attendance has been better through the virtual. It's just something to note without the travel and those expectations that we have seen. Better attendance of forum meetings, which is an improvement, I guess, in what was operating before. But I think the hybrid model, for me, I think provides a really good way forward because it allows people to come physically to a meeting if they want to, and also provides those that can't physically get there with the opportunity to still attend. So I guess that's where my mind would be.
I think there are two kinds of hybrid that are being discussed here, really, aren't there? So there's the hybrid where some people are at Shire Hall and some are not, and there's the hybrid where out of the 4 meetings a year, one of those meetings perhaps is at Shire Hall. So people have an opportunity to see each other and know who the people are and get all those other messages that you get when you meet people face to face. And then other meetings, whether it's a 1 to 3 split or a 2 and 2 split, are held remotely with the benefits, as you said, Phil, of actually quite good attendance and relative time efficiency, so people aren't driving up and down the M5 the whole time. So any more comments about that at all? Becky, did you? No, I think hands still up. Perhaps Claire still.
Yeah. I feel that with face-to-face meetings, I think there is often a greater commitment to the meeting than when everybody is sat at home in their own room or their office for 2 hours on a WebEx meeting. I think the quality of the discussions tends to be improved when people are in a room together because you're really focusing on the agenda. So I think we've got better over the last year with these forum meetings, but I certainly think the first couple, I don't think we did them justice. So from my point of view, yes, it isn't easy just to get across to Shire Hall all the time, but I do think we miss out if we don't have the face-to-face discussions at least half the time.
Okay, thank you. Will.
Yeah, I just second those comments. I've got a lot done during this meeting, but not necessarily about the meeting, so I'm not terrible at focusing. But I would certainly, perhaps the first meeting should be face to face if we can. So particularly for newer colleagues, to put names to faces. And I think some of the big debates that we have, there wasn't much to debate about today in terms of disagreement, but there are sometimes, and I think that is better to be had face to face. So I certainly think a hybrid where we do have some meetings where people come in would be valuable. Certainly the first one anyway, and I think get things started that way.
Okay, thank you, Will. Any other comments? Okay.
Andrew, can I just say that the hybrid meeting technology won't be in place in Shire Hall until early next year? So we definitely wouldn't be able to do the September meeting as a hybrid format.
No. Okay. And am I right in thinking the hybrid is a bit like the Houses of Parliament, where you have big screens on the wall and so on? Is that how it work?
I believe so. I'm not quite sure the actual process of it all at the moment, but I can circulate some information when I'm aware.
I can assure you we don't have the same budget as the Houses of Parliament, Andrew,
Yeah.
I'm afraid.
That's right.
Okay. So what I'm picking up at the moment is that perhaps the September meeting is at Shire Hall, face to face, and then subsequent meetings online.
I think September will have to be subject to COVID restrictions, won't it? Because if there are still restrictions in place in any way, shape or form, a room to try and get the total number of members of forum into would be very challenging, I think.
Yeah, we wouldn't be able to do it unless the restrictions
So,
are...
and because the room won't be available in Shire Hall either, so the September meeting is going to be WebEx, isn't it?
It depends. We can have it in Shire Hall if we need to, just as an in-person meeting, not in a hybrid format.
Yes.
Completely. If all the COVID restrictions are eased.
Right. I mean,
but a hybrid format meeting could only take place next year because we don't have the technology.
Right. And certainly a meeting in Shire Hall with everybody wearing face masks would be dreadful.
Yeah.
I mean, I for one wouldn't have a clue what was going on.
Yeah.
Okay, so right.
So we could wait and see, really.
I think it might be a bit of that, really. I mean, I think we're saying probably that the September meeting will be on WebEx. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then potentially the November meeting could be in Shire Hall. An opportunity for people to meet each other and to see each other, expressing their views and so on, and go from there.
I think that would give us certainty. If September we said WebEx, because we just don't. It's worth kind of being firm, isn't it? September said WebEx. November we should be in a position where we can physically all be in a room, hopefully.
Yes.
And then from there on in, we can look at hybrid options as well.
Excellent. Good. I think that's probably a wait and see a little bit. Okay. Is that okay, Joe?
Yes, fine. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Phil, F40 and COVID update.
Yeah, so just a very quick update, really. So COVID-wise, you'll have been aware that there was a recent funding announcement, a package of 1.4 billion. I guess the challenge here at the moment is that what's being allocated is being allocated to different programs of activity, and I think a lot of as I understand it, a lot of the guidance and recommendations going in are trying to get more funding directly into schools to allow school leaders to have more flexibility with the funding to be able to use it to meet children's needs in the way that they see fit. However, at the moment, what we have is a 1.4 billion investment. The tutoring program is obviously a key part of that, and I think all schools need to be thoroughly aware of that tutoring program and making sure they're accessing that. You can see that there is a clear commitment over a number of years to provide that program of tutoring. So we need to make sure across the county we're making the most of that. And then across the two other areas, we're talking about professional development, really looking at building evidence-based professional development in the early years sector, and then 253 million into teacher training and development. So that was what was announced. You'll be aware that the COVID czar or recovery czar, Kevin Collins, left his position around this, because I think there was a request for, and it's public out there, isn't it? There was a request for significantly more money than this, and I don't think they felt this delivered fully what that recovery team were looking for. Having said that, we are still expecting, I think, more announcements around support into education, but I don't think it will ever be to the level of what the recovery group were aiming for, which was somewhere north of 10 billion, as I understand it. So, you know, that's the position around the COVID funding at the moment. And I guess we will send some comms out around on this very shortly, just to make sure, particularly around that tutoring programme, that everybody's fully aware of it and making full access of it. But you know, £1 billion over 3 years is a lot of money, and we need to make sure we're using that.
Sorry, Phil, can I just stop you a minute? Claire raised her hand.
What did you?
Was that something specific about?
She looked shocked. I don't think she's.
She didn't raise her hand. That's why she's shocked. Do carry on, Phil.
Yeah. Okay. The other update was just that there was a meeting of the F40 executive earlier this week, actually, I guess their priorities remain focused on the national funding formula. They still focused on trying to push the government around that. They've had a meeting with the DfE funding policy team recently. We are expecting a consultation around the hard national funding formula to come shortly, this year certainly. That shouldn't, as Neil promises me, shouldn't have a significant impact for us, because we've agreed on repeatedly over the last couple of years as a forum to try and align our local national funding formula to the national hard formula. So ultimately, we're matching the national funding formula at the moment. So as it moves towards a hard national funding formula, it shouldn't provide any sharp shocks to the way that the funding system is working in Gloucestershire. But there will be a consultation around that. As I mentioned earlier, we're expecting a consultation on the high needs funding formula later in the year as well. And the report back to the F40 group from the policy team was that the SEND review should be published in June. So the DfE's review into SEND we'd expect to see coming out in the next couple of weeks. All of which provides us with a quite a good deal of activity, particularly when the SEND review lands. So I think there probably is a need at some stage to initiate a working group outside of the formal forum meetings to look at the impact of some of those things as and when they come. I think particularly, firstly, the SEND review, and then as and when we get the consultations, I think having a small working group to look at those on behalf of the forum would be very helpful. So over the next couple of weeks, we'll communicate some options around that and invite members to participate should they wish. That was all from me.
Thank you very much, Phil. Any comments anybody wishes to make about either of those last two bullet points, or all three of them, in fact? Okay, thank you. So on the papers, just confirm the agenda, just confirm the dates for future meetings. So the next one being on 16th of September at 2 o'clock. And as we've discussed a few minutes ago, that will be a WebEx meeting. And then we'll consider the way forward from there in terms of formats at that meeting in September. Can I thank everybody for their time this afternoon and for your contributions. I hope you have a good summer break, even if it may not involve travelling to faraway and exotic places. But nonetheless, I hope you have a great rest and a great break during the summer period. Thank you very much. Thank you.